again, thanks so much ZeroMission for having me, and thank you everyone for speaking such amazing English in Sweden. It makes this so much easier. Oh yeah, sure. And so now we're going to play a game of Spot the Difference. This was a parcel I went to in Nicaragua, both 3 years ago and actually just recently in July as well. And this picture was taken 3 years ago. It's in the northwest of Nicaragua in a place called Somoto. If you had come there maybe about 7 or 8 years ago before this picture was taken, it would have looked exactly the same. And over those last 6 years, we've been working with the farmer who owns the parcel of land on the right. And since we've been working with them, they've been growing about 1,500 trees. They've been sequestering almost 300 tons of CO2 over time. And they're earning about $2,000 on top of the income that they would be normally receiving as a farmer. I work with Taking Root. We're an organization based in Vancouver, and I'm going to talk to you today about the work we do in creating carbon removals through community-led reforestation. My name is Sheldon. I'm the commercial director at Taking Root, and I've been working there for about 4 years, helping to expand and scale up our projects in Nicaragua and also hopefully around the world. At Taking Root, our sole purpose is to accelerate the restoration of the world's forests. And we do that by developing world-class reforestation projects. In particular, we're focused on being an enabler and creating the capacity so that small-scale farmers in the tropics can grow trees and earn money from the carbon that they remove from the atmosphere and also from the forest that they grow. We were founded about 15 years ago, and during that time we're growing over 13 million trees, reforesting about 10,000 hectares, with about $10 million being paid out to farmers in the form of cash and materials, with over 2 million tons of carbon being removed from the atmosphere. So you might be saying, okay, you're talking about forests, but hang on, why are you now talking about farmers? And that's because when you look at the opportunity for reforestation, you very quickly start to look at the tropics, because that's where a lot of land has been historically deforested, and you have this huge opportunity for forest restoration there. And when you look at the land in the tropics and who owns that land, the majority of that land is owned by small-scale farmers, known in the industry as smallholder farmers, who own kind of about 2 football fields to 4 football fields worth of land. There are 500 million of these farmers. And so if you're going to talk about restoring forests, you've got to start talking about the people who own that land and who make the decisions with what's going to happen with that land. And there is this huge opportunity because we know there's been this massive drive for corporates to want to invest in climate solutions to become carbon neutral, to take responsibility and take action on the climate. We have some of these organizations in the room, and these are not small companies. We're talking about really big companies with big corporate and business ambitions. And these corporates could be working with these farmers to restore forests, to improve livelihoods, and to remove carbon from the atmosphere. Like all these things, it's never that simple. Because when we're talking about carbon credits and carbon removals, these things need to be high quality. And quite rightly, corporates demand a certain standard of, okay, what is it going to take for me to want to invest in this carbon? Is this going to be fair for communities? Is it going to be additional? So would those trees have grown anyway without our support? Is it durable? Are the trees going to stay in the ground? How do I know that someone's not going to cut them down in 2 years' time? And also rigorous. How do I know that the carbon that you're saying you're sequestering is actually real? There's a lot of complexity behind that. And all through that is, from our perspective, and what's really important is that being a transparent and traceable thing. And so to achieve these things has meant that in the past, reforestation has not necessarily met those standards. On the one hand, there's been a big focus on planting trees, but not growing trees. So obviously, if your goal is to plant a tree, you're going to set the goalpost to plant a tree. You're not going to grow them over time. And so, quite understandably, there's a lot of fear about organizations who maybe planted trees, but those trees are not going to grow, they're not going to sequester carbon. And so to say that they will or they have done is potentially a risk in terms of a false claim. The second piece, as you can imagine, and you can see on the picture on the left, is we're working with lots of individual parcels of land in really rural areas. You know, they were talking get on the back of a motorbike and drive on a mud road for 2 hours. And so how do you manage that? And the organizational complexity on the ground makes creating the reporting, managing these programs really complex and so quite difficult historically. And then finally, the reporting into certifications that can prove these things and create a standard and level to adhere to has just been really costly because it requires a lot of expertise, it's really complicated. And so historically that's been out of reach, particularly for small scale farmers where there are not PhDs in these areas. So how do we actually ensure the trees grow and sequester carbon over time? I'm going to talk a little bit about a case study, CommuniTree, which is our flagship project in Nicaragua. It was started in 2010, and it's a certified project. So you have different carbon certifications in the industry, and we work with one called Plan Vivo, which is specifically focused on communities and natural climate solutions like reforestation. And in this project, we grow various types of forests, all designed, we'll come to that in the next slide, all designed around the livelihoods of farmers and bringing better opportunities to farmers through growing trees. So the first way that we ensure the trees grow, and I cannot stress this enough, is you've got to improve landowners' livelihoods. I think everyone here has, sort of thought to themselves, oh, it'd be great if I, planted some, tomatoes, and then you get the seeds, you plant them, and then you forget about them, and you kind of go, it's not really worth my while. It's a tomato. I can go down the shop and buy them. Okay, fine. Yeah, it's no different for a farmer owning that land. They're only going to grow the trees if it's worth their while, and if they can see improved benefits from the long term in terms of their income, in terms of their livelihood. And so the way we think about that is starting kind of backwards. What is the long-term vision for this forest? What is it going to give the farmer? And so the various forests we grow with our farmers create a source of timber income, and also from sustainable harvesting, and also commercial crops like coffee that they're growing alongside those forests. And then working backwards, if you're talking about timber, you're talking about 10, 15, 20 years in the future, depending on the tree species. So you're not going to wait for 20 years. Like, you're going to find something better, especially because these are farmers that often are earning less than $2 a day. And so we work with the local organization of farmers to make sure there are income streams to the farmer as the trees grow. So there's always an incentive to maintain the forest, and they see the benefit that forest is providing. So then, in year 6 or 7, the trees start to create seeds, which the project purchases back to plant new trees. And so that creates a source of income from the farmer. The trees, as they grow, create a lot of wood waste, and there is thinning that takes place in the plantations. And that wood, it can't be used for building or anything, it's too small. And so that wood gets transformed into biochar, which is kind of like a charcoal substance. It's very dense and actually stores a lot of carbon in it. And we turn that into biochar, and we actually put that back in the soil with the plants, and we sell it to other companies, which means that we're buying wood constantly from the farmers that are growing the forest as a new source of income. And then, of course, earlier on, there are crop harvests. So sometimes when, on the one hand, commercial crops like coffee, when we're growing coffee with trees, and also subsistence crops, like in the early years when the trees are very small, you see farmers growing maize, growing beans alongside their trees as well. And then there are also the carbon payments. So that initial upfront investment in a forest takes a lot. There's the cost of the trees, there's planting, this is a lot of labor, there's weeding. And so the carbon payments, so when as a corporate you buy this carbon credit, what that's really paying for is 10 years of payments to the farmer, a lot of them loaded upfront, to make sure the farmer has that incentive to put all that work in when the trees are at their most vulnerable. And so by doing this, we create this system whereby the farmer is incentivized all the way through to maintain their forests for the long term. And what's not on here, but if you went and talked to a lot of our farmers in the program, is on top of this, there are lots of other benefits like water retention, shade for animals, and actually often when you talk to a farmer, that's what they will lead with, because and they actually speak way more articulately than most politicians about why the need for trees. But this is all in the background of making sure they want to keep their forests for the long term. The second thing is supporting farmers. So again, it's all very well having an incentive system, but if you don't have support, how are the farmers going to get there? Growing trees sounds really simple, but there are lots of activities you have to do if you want those trees to grow, particularly in the early years. So when you're planting, you need to do weeding over the first few years. You then need to do pruning to make sure the trees are going to grow if you want in the right way, if you want to sell them for timber. And of course, you need to monitor that land to make sure you're on track and to be able to intervene with farmers at the right time if they're not on the path to success. And so we focus on providing long-term capacity building, and we're talking over 10 years with the farmers, where farmers will be visited on a regular basis by technicians to support them, make sure they understand what needs to happen on their parcel, and help connect them to those value chains that we talked about on the last slide. And then finally, technology. If, as you can imagine in that picture, you saw all these parcels of land in different places, that creates a real challenge. First, in terms of management, how do you know which farmers have joined the program, how they're doing, how the trees are growing? And so having the information to be able to manage and ensure those forests are growing. And then also secondly, automating and producing that forest and carbon reporting so that there is proof for the certifications and corporates that, okay, this carbon has actually been sequestered. There is a forest in this place that we're imagining it's on the other side of the world. And so at Taking Root, we have our own technology platform, which includes a mobile application and a web platform to facilitate this on the ground and automate all that reporting that's required. And I'm actually just going to go into a little bit more detail and get a little bit nerdy of how we do that. So the first is we do lots of field monitoring. And so in the mobile application, our technicians will go to the field, and this is all often offline. There's no mobile or internet reception. And they will map a parcel. You can kind of see the outline of a parcel here. And they'll walk around the parcel. And so that means, first of all, okay, we know where the trees are going to be planted. When they do that, automatically what's called a sampling frame gets created, which basically says, you know, you could go count every tree, but that's really time consuming and not efficient, and it's extremely costly. So you create a sampling frame which says, if you just measure, you know, 20% of this parcel across randomly allocated plots, we can then extrapolate using statistics how many trees and how much carbon is being stored across the whole area of land. So our technicians will go into the field and they will monitor these plots, and we will extrapolate this information to know how many trees and how much carbon is on the land, and also gives really good management information for, okay, are we meeting tree targets? Then what we do is we combine that field information with various types of remote sensing. We use Google Earth Engine as a platform, and we connect to satellite imagery like Sentinel-2 and use other sources of remote sensing like radar. And we will train that imagery using the field data we've collected using machine learning to understand, based on remote sensing, how is that forest changing over time and how much carbon is being stored over time. And we'll do two things. The first is, when someone goes into the field, they haven't monitored all these areas. So we'll fill in those gaps, because then we can create a more accurate assessment of how much carbon is being stored on that parcel. And then the other thing is that over time, we can then start to, without going into the field, we can start understanding how that forest is changing and how that carbon is being stored over time on all these individual plots of land, which A, reduces the amount of effort on the ground so that they can really focus on interventions and high impact interventions, and also means we can create that rigor and proof for the carbon certifications and for corporates that this carbon is actually being sequestered over time. And so maybe with that, and given I'm in a room with corporates, I thought I'd flip it around a little bit and say, okay, so we have this amazing opportunity. We have solutions that work. We have forests now which are over coming up to 15 years old. And so we know that this is a model that can work. And so, but there's so much more to be done. And so what can corporates do to accelerate this and play a part? And the first thing I think is think long term. If we're going to meet the climate targets that have been set, we've got to be thinking long into the future and what carbon needs to be stored into the future. And when you start thinking about that, natural climate solutions like reforestation is one of the only ways we're going to get there with other solutions. And so we've got to be thinking about investing in these solutions that are going to be removing carbon over time from the atmosphere, along with reductions, along with everything else that we're doing. The second thing is to demand quality. Over the last few years, the carbon market has exploded. There's tons of demand. And before that, it was a really nascent, it was a really early market. And so corporates coming in and demanding high quality is going to raise the bar. And so demanding for things like transparency, demanding to see proof of how these solutions are going to last for the long term is a great thing to raise the standard of projects. And the final thing is paying for quality. Good quality carbon removal is expensive. It's hard to do, it's really intensive. And so there's an idea that you could go out on the market and buy a carbon credit for 20 cents. I can guarantee you it will do nothing. So looking at it, you pay for what you get. And so rather than necessarily being scared of how much it costs, the fact that costs are going up and the prices are high is a really good thing for the industry. And it's a really good thing to make these solutions really robust at a large scale globally in order to meet those climate targets. And then finally, through this, we're showing how these solutions can be scaled and can be achieved at amazing scale. We started with a handful of farmers over here, and now this program is nationwide. We have 75 people on the ground working full-time across the country with several thousand farmers. And it shows what's possible with the help of corporates investing in these solutions, and really good local connections and real focus on quality and livelihoods on the ground. And maybe with that, I'd like to leave the last word with one of our project team. If I can, I might need your